should make some cookies. All right, let's see. You know, this is going to take a minute. All right, we're on.
All right.
Look at me with my little hat.
It looks very warm.
Well, and that's the funny thing is because, you know, it's like 68 or 70 degrees in my office. So really, what am I doing? But when it's cold outside, like you feel the need to wear a hat. I mean, I wear a hat always, but you feel the need to wear like a warm hat to like convince yourself of something.
Particularly feel that way because you don't have as much.
Well, I don't have any coverage.
Yeah.
No, yeah. We can talk openly about that. There's no shame in it. Some people are very sensitive about that. I am not one of those people.
Like, did you know?
So, yeah. So I grew up with good morning, Leslie. Good morning, Mary. Good to have you all with us. We have begun. I was going to tell her a story and then I'm going to tell her a mini story and then we'll actually get started with our actual thing where we welcome everybody. Well, I grew up with, my dad was bald and like somehow even less hair than I have. Like I have a couple of hairs here on the top and that's not even the case for him. But we used to just tease him mercilessly about being bald. Like when I look back on the things I said to him as a child.
Yeah.
And he never cared. Like at all. Like being bald was like, he didn't care. Like he was bald. Like it was,
what are you gonna do about it? Like you can't.
So in my mind, going bald was just a thing that people did and it wasn't a big deal. And then when I started to go bald, he was like, what are you gonna do? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, you're losing your hair. So what's your plan? And I go, I plan to go bald. And he was like, oh. And I was like he was just like sad about it. And I was like, well, that's what you did. Like you just went bald and didn't worry about it. And he goes, well, yeah, but they didn't have all that shit when I was growing up.
Hair club for men.
Yeah, like Rogaine and Propecia.
Yeah.
So I was like, it just totally crumbled my image of him because in my mind, he just didn't care.
Yeah.
And that's how he always projected himself. We're watching Battlestar Galactica right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming you've watched Battlestar Galactica. You seem like the type.
Not.
Okay. Well, there's a character on it named Lieutenant Gaeta, and he has this curly, full head of hair. And last night, you know, while watching it over a glass of whiskey, I said to my wife, that's what my hair would look like if I had hair right now. Because I used to have very full, curly hair.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I know. Because every time I see a guy with hair like that, I'm like, my hair. And she's like, I know. It's okay, buddy. Which is funny because I actually 99% of the time I'm perfectly happy with my hair. And she's like, I've never known you any other way. And I fell in love with you looking like this. Please don't want to look different.
Right.
Which is like so counter to our understanding of ourselves.
Yeah.
But how can I find myself lovable? Aren't I supposed to just hate everything about myself and wish it was different? Just like the Lord commanded.
Right.
And on that note, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome. You may have noticed a new title. A new title. Hey, so I guess, Kira, should we tell them?
I think we should. You know, I was trying to debate, should we tell them at the end or should we tell them at the beginning?
I'm just so excited I can't hang. Okay, we can tell them at the end. What do you think?
Let's tell them now.
Okay. So you guys, hi everybody. Hey friends. You know how we've been doing this thing where I keep inviting Kira back over and over and over and over and over again to be my guest host for the last 2 months? Well, Kira, what if we just kept doing this?
That sounds awesome.
And then instead of it being this thing where I keep inviting you, it's ours and we do it together and we're co-hosts. That's a dramatic reenactment of the conversation that Kira and I had. You all have just been clued in to what we already know is clearly a great idea, which is Kira and I are a team. Kira, I'm on this side. Can we high five? Is it possible? Bam. Oh, wow. That felt good. Did that work for you too, or was it opposite?
I don't know.
The Zoom thing is so funny because everyone thinks everyone else sees the exact same thing, but like, you know, it's not at all the case. The people are in all sorts of different places.
Yeah. No, it's like the Brady Bunch or whatever. But yeah, so we've got some new branding. It's no longer Ask a Priest. And I keep thinking of this as a podcast, even though we're video. So
Right.
our live show, our I don't know, video hour is
Yeah.
now called Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil.
Are you there, God? It's Kira and Phil. I love this title so very much. And by the way, it was Kira's idea. Wait, Leslie says we have to high five the other way. So
This way?
is it like this? Which is opposite for me.
Yeah, I'm going away from you on my screen.
Oh, well, we'll see. Or is it we both go the same way? That doesn't make any sense.
No.
But nothing makes any sense right now, by the way.
No.
Hey, guys, everything is crazy all the time. And we're tired of it.
Yeah.
Are you tired of it?
I'm extremely tired of it, man.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you, so today I told Phil that I would talk about this a little bit. Today is the feast of the presentation of our Lord in the temple.
Yes.
Otherwise known as Candlemas. And
obviously, because if you're presenting Jesus in the temple, then obviously it's about Candlemas.
Yeah. It's also Groundhog Day. That's like kind of the secular.
That's my religious holiday.
February 2nd.
Good morning, Betsy. Good morning. Kathy's on with us. Sorry, go ahead.
All right. Now, so it's 40 days after Christmas. It commemorates when Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to the temple to dedicate him. And we get that in Luke, where Anna and Simeon encounter Jesus and kind of proclaim him as the Messiah.
Yeah.
So it's a feast day for us.
Love that.
Tradition. Love feast days. Traditionally, it was actually when, if you put your Christmas tree or you put your greenery up like around Christmas Eve, Christmas Day,
right,
keep it up kind of until today. So I actually still have my little
look at
a Valentine's Day tree. I think I need some light and sparkle.
Your tree is faring better than that guy hanging out in your room.
And then we've got Corey, who's my reminder that I need to plan for Ash Wednesday.
Fantastic. I love it.
But today was for morning prayer. Psalm 42 was one of the psalms for today, and I tell you, it hits differently in kind of like the middle of a little bit of a depressive spell. And
yeah. Which one? Talk to me about Psalm 42.
So it's like my tears are my food day and night.
Oh yeah.
And there's a little bit in there. And my parishioner posted pictures from last year. Candlemas fell on a Sunday. We did a big Candlemas procession where we like met outside on our labyrinth and processed into the church. And he had pictures of this procession. And there's a little bit in there about like, I led your people, the multitude of your people, into your holy place.
And you're like, but we can't go into our holy place.
It's like, it hits differently during a pandemic, man.
It does. I mean, I think the thing that I've been dreading the most has been a pandemic Michaelmas. Or a Candlemas. It's really just been. No, you're right though. No, the psalm hits differently. The readings hit differently. These feast days that we hold dear, the celebrations, hit differently. Last Easter was one of my worst days of my career, and it was everybody did a beautiful job. And my wife, we were like hunkering down with our next door neighbors who have kids, and we did an Easter egg hunt with them in the backyard, and the church did a great job of putting together a beautiful worship service online. And I was just so depressed.
Yeah.
It was just a bad day to be Christian. That doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we're church people. It's what we do. Like, we're church folk.
Yeah.
Look at us. We're doing a religious YouTube live. I mean, of course we care. I was checking with Kira before we started, you guys. I'm still not on board with Candlemas. So we're going to take a step back. Now, when you turn it into being about the feast of the presentation of our Lord, I'm never going to fall. Like you've always got me. You've got me trapped whenever it's a feast about something that happened to Jesus, because I'm a big Jesus guy. So I'm like, all right, fine, I'm in. And y'all remember the presentation of Jesus in the temple is an awesome event. But like, what's the candle part?
So the candle part, actually, I probably need to do a little bit of my research on this. I know that it was often the day when the candles were like presented in church to be blessed for the use of the church. And
For
people,
the rest of the year sort of thing, right?
yeah,
Like,
people could also bring candles from home that could be blessed. Like if you have a candle for like your prayer space, or that you light when you say prayer as a family, or you meditate, or like whatever, to kind of set apart that time as holy.
sure.
You could bring those candles to the church and the priest
Yeah.
would bless them. So again, it's this theme of kind of like of light. We're in a time in the Northern Hemisphere where the days are getting like just a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Spring is like almost, I mean, maybe it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
But
As
it is,
it's Groundhog Day today, 6 more weeks of winter, snow on the ground here in Cincinnati, the Queen City.
yeah,
But you're right.
we're closer to spring than we
Yeah.
are to the, to fall.
So I was telling Kira before all this started that my whole attitude about Candlemas historically has been like, so that's all made up. But here's what I'm realizing in times, and it is, but here's the thing that I'm realizing in times like this. So what? Like, man, does that bring you joy? Cool, do that. Like, light a bunch of candles and bless them. Great. Like, I think that's beautiful. Fine. Like, oh, you find joy in that thing? Do that thing right now. Is sort of where my head's at. And I do get annoyed when some of our more spiky colleagues sort of post things about Candlemas, and it seems very sort of like, if you know sort of thing. Right. And if you don't know, oh, well, that's too bad. I feel like the new guy at Downton Abbey, and someone's like, you'll get used to how we do things around here properly. Like, okay, I thought we were all just loving Jesus, but that's cool. I could be wrong about candles. But now I'm sort of like, you know what? Candlemas, go for it, man.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate everything. Like, I'm for it. Let's do it. So, what do they take Jesus to the temple for?
To dedicate him.
That's right, because he's the firstborn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They offer a sacrifice of 2 pigeons.
Because they're poor.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't do a dove or a
pig. Yeah.
pig. By the way, Leslie Martin, isn't everything made up in a sense? This is literally the conversation Kira and I were having before this. Yeah. Isn't everything made up in a sense? Even if it's a real event, you have to just actually decide to celebrate it. Yes, literally before we got started, I was saying that the first person I ever complained to, they were talking about Candlemas, and I said, that's made up. And she said, everything's made up. And that's exactly right. Everything at some point you just decide is a thing.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not like the birth of Christ. It's not like the birth of Christ is made up. He was born.
Right.
But like the decision to like give it a name and do something about it, it's all made up. That's great.
Thing, like today is Tuesday, February 2nd. Like
Groundhog Day.
It's made up, and we all have kind of agreed to this
totally
ruse about time.
By the way, I don't know if this makes me like a QAnon person, but time is a sham. I think I'm now part of a conspiracy theory because I've said that.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure.
And the thing about the liturgical calendar and the cycle of seasons and feast days and fast days, all of this kind of thing, is I find it helpful and I find it beautiful because it sort of separates, it makes that time sacred. Like it isn't just, ho hum, another Tuesday in the middle of a pandemic. It's like, oh, it's Candlemas. It's the
Candlemas.
Feast of the Presentation.
Yeah, it's the Feast of the Presentation. Yeah. I'm for that.
Yeah. I think it's hard because our time is so secularized and our time is so contingent on like the 40-hour work week and like Monday through Friday. And then we have this weekend but we make meaning out of time. People say, oh, Wednesday, it's hump day, or like, I've got the Sunday scaries, or like, there are all kinds of.
Okay, hold on. First of all, I love you. Secondly, I have never heard of the Sunday scaries before. Is this a thing you feel right before Monday? Because you have to think about, I mean, it's beautiful.
It's like that, like, oh, I just had a great weekend and now I have to go back to work. I know I have to go back to work tomorrow. Like it's still the weekend, but like
I usually feel that on Saturday because you and I preach on Sundays usually.
yeah.
So I get the Saturday scaries.
I do too.
Yeah.
Not because I don't love what I do, but just that like, do I have everything in order? Are people gonna yell at me about my sermon?
I have to tell you a story about my first job. I worked at this church. I mean, my first job as a priest, and I worked for this guy, Rob, he's still that guy that like, you have those people in your life who do what you do, that you're like, if I can kind of do it like that, not I don't want to be them, but if I can kind of do it like that, I know I'll be all right. This was a guy who was when I met him, almost 30 years into an ordained ministry and loved his job. And everybody he worked with loved working with him, and everyone who went to his church loved him. And he had a wife, it still does, but at the time, I'm talking about the time, had a wife who came to church on Sundays, didn't sit in the front because she was like, no, that's not cool, but sat in the back, but was always there, liked being there, knew what she liked doing, didn't like try to pretend she wanted to be on this or that, like did the things she wanted to do and was very her agency was very well intact. 4 children, all liked him, liked their parents, came to church when they wanted to, didn't when they didn't, like just a sort of like healthy thing, right? Like healthy, like across the board. And I think if I could be 30 years in and my kids believe in Jesus and my wife doesn't hate me and my people aren't scared of me and I'm not looking for the exit, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah.
Right? Like that sounds great.
That's the
And
goal.
it's an ongoing process of faithfulness for this guy. He's really genuinely one of my mentors and people that I look up to. But I remember him like taking vacation and coming back, and he'd been fishing, and he's like, you ready to come back? He's like, no, I'm never ready to come back. I'm like, huh? He's like, Phil, I wouldn't come back if they didn't pay me. That's what he goes, look, I'm like, I thought he's like, oh, I love my job, but it's still a job. That's why they call it a job. He's like, if they didn't pay you, you wouldn't go to it. That's the definition of a job. And I was just like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like at the time I was like not ready to fully get into that because I was so happy, like in my new vocation and like fresh and still had that new priest smell, But now I'm like, I love my job. I adore my job. But if you stopped paying me, I would go away. You would never see me again.
I wouldn't keep showing up.
And I'm definitely love my days off. Love them. Adore them. Like
highly recommend taking them.
Yeah. I'm pushing my staff. I have a staff and this church has, there's a culture around this church, as I think is the case with a lot of sort of like program sized churches, which is like, we got programs, we got stuff, we're awesome. Good. And I like all the stuff we do. I mean, the thing is, I think it's great. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. But there's also this sense of like, we should never rest. Like we should all be Jessie when she's on caffeine and Saved by the Bell, right? Like that sort of mentality.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I'm so scared, right? Like that's how we should all like operate. And I'm really, especially because of what's happened in the last year, I'm like, this doesn't work. And we're doing really good things, but everybody should have 2 days off. And act like it, like actually act like that's real and take it. And we're not the only profession like this. A lot of professions are like this, but in our profession, like so many people joke about days off. It's not funny. Sorry, I don't mean to tell you your joke's not funny.
No.
But it's not. It's sad. Like we need to breathe like other people and take time off and be people, so that we can be re-energized and reoriented around what matters, and so that we don't burn out, and so we don't become miserable and treat you poorly, like
or worse,
treat ourselves poorly and fall into addiction, harm ourselves, do terrible things to the church. I mean, none of this is new.
Yeah, we all know churches where that has happened. Unfortunately, a lot of churches.
Yeah.
A lot of clergy that's happened to.
How do we take care of ourselves? And take care of each other. And priests not only don't want to admit that, but we're not good at admitting that we need people to help us. So that's a big thing. Anyways, I just keep thinking about like, yeah, I like my time off. And I don't, why wouldn't I? Doesn't make me not, I mean, you can tell I love my job. Look at me. I'm happy. Like, what's the question? And also I need to, you know what, like, and it's a job, still a job, right? We're going to retire someday.
Hopefully.
Right. Fair enough. Wait, hold on. Leslie says it's very important to me that you actually virtually high five for the stream. Phil, use your left arm. Kira, use your right arm, please. Okay, to me, we're both going in the same direction. So this looks more like an ABBA dance video, but okay. We'll do it anyway. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
I'm like in the right. Yeah.
Okay, Leslie, we tried. Any words on that? Okay. So weird. Okay.
Okay. I think that was right. Yeah, because I'm looking at it and Maury is on the other side of me.
So Maury's technically on your right side?
He's over here. He's on my left side for me, but I think he's on.
Oh, I see.
I'm looking at the YouTube video and he's on the right.
I think that this has been a delight of a first official action. Okay. We have some questions
though.
We do have some questions. They're important questions, as far as I can tell. Okay, let's see here. Let's see here.
What did you want to start with?
Oh, I wanted to start with my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Where else would a guy want to start? Okay, so my mother-in-law, Becky. Hi, Becky, if you're listening. She was listening. She was like checking out one of our shows. I think she was checking out last week. And we were talking about the resurrection. I don't remember why, but who cares? We should always be talking about the resurrection.
Right. That's kind of one of my like go-to things to talk about.
It's the best. Just FYI, it's the best. The resurrection is my favorite. But she asked the question, hold on, let me get her words just right, because I like to try to get now it was in a text exchange. She didn't go through the proper mailbag channels, but that's okay. That's okay. I've encouraged people to send us questions in any way they see fit. I have to find her text message because I text with roughly 30 people a day. So, okay, there we go. She also Kira talked about a Spotify playlist last week, and she wanted to get onto that. So now she's onto that. So Kira, you're already changing lives. Question. I like when people start with a question by saying question. I do that all the time. I announce it. Question.
Yeah, me too.
Resurrection of the body. No question yet, but here we go. Resurrection of the body. What about cremation? That's it. That's her question. And by the way, I love the brevity. I like announce that there is a question, announce the subject, resurrection of the body, and then the question itself. What about cremation? Mm-hmm. So I have family members that are cremated.
I do too.
I think I'll either be cremated or I'm kind of interested in being composted, turned into a tree.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be?
Right.
And then planted in Israel just to confuse people. Kira, what's your take on this? Like,
yeah.
How do you, okay, let's take a step back. Mm-hmm. Every single Sunday we say, we believe in the resurrection of the body and the life everlasting. And our scriptures are pretty clear that the resurrection of Jesus is a bodily resurrection, and that we will be participating in the resurrection of Jesus in our resurrection. And there's a lot of language about being raised up on the last day. And we have language, though, from Job, but it's nevertheless in our burial rite, where we say, on the last day, I will stand before my Redeemer, and in my body, I shall see God. So, what do? Like, for the record, I mean, a lot of people like Episcopalians are so comfortable kind of going fast and loose with the actual doctrine. And so we'll sort of be like, I mean, it's sort of like a more metaphor. Like we have some people we haven't kicked out yet that are like, well, I think of the resurrection as a metaphor
Mhm.
I don't think of it as a metaphor, but the idea, or even if it's not metaphorical, like there's something like it is a language for life after death.
Yeah, it's sort of
There's death.
spiritualized or
Yeah, and by the way, if that's the case, cool. I'm cool. Listen, anything where there's something after this and I get to hang with God, I'm in. Okay. I'm not gonna get there and be like, but where's my body? Like it's cool. Like if I show up and I'm in a different body, if I show up and I'm just a spirit, if I'm in, we're not complaining. Okay. It's like when you get free tickets to a show, you don't complain about the seats, right? I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm all in at the wedding banquet. I'll wear the garment. We're in.
we're in.
But we technically proclaim a resurrection of the body.
Mhm.
And I remember I always try to recruit for whatever diocese I'm in.
I know.
She does know. And I was back visiting my seminary, and there was a student who was graduating soon, and she hadn't found a job yet. And I literally was like, I didn't have a job to offer her, but I was basically doing a pre-interview so that I could go back to people in the diocese and recommend her, which I did. And she ended up getting a job. I'm not bragging, but I'm bragging a little
Yeah.
bit. But I was like talking to her and I said, so let's get to the brass tacks. Like, do you believe in the resurrection? And like, I didn't ask her all spiritual discernment questions and blah, blah, blah. I was like, do you believe in the resurrection? And she goes, yes, both kinds, Jesus and mine. And I was just like, ooh, I love that answer.
Yeah.
So we believe in a bodily resurrection.
Yes.
How do we deal with that? What does it look like to actually, I guess I'm asking you, logistically, how the heck do we deal with that? And then spiritually, here's the big one for this group, right? Because I think this group, and I just mean not just the people in the chat, anybody's watching, part of you could be like, okay, that's the doctrine. Great. But here's the big question for a lot of us. Who cares? Like, I like eternal life, as I just said. Who cares how if I'm in? How do we logistically get to resurrection of the body? Question one. And then question two, who cares? Why does it matter? So what do you do with that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out sort of where to start. Obviously there has been, theologians from the early church fathers and onward have written about, the resurrection of the body, and with the big question of kind of like, what will our resurrected bodies look like? Like Phil said, like from scripture, we know that Jesus was in a body that was somewhat recognizable to his disciples. Like sometimes it was less recognizable than others. The other thing that we know from Jesus' resurrected body was that he still bore the scars of the crucifixion and the marks of crucifixion, which was one way that the disciples obviously identified him. So the question is like, what does our resurrected body look like? Will our resurrected body be gendered? I mean, one of the church fathers, I'm going to mess this up and somebody's going to get mad at me for misquoting somebody. One of the church fathers said that basically we'll all be in like Jesus' body, like we'll all be resurrected as men because Jesus was a man. I don't love that idea.
It's also counter to what Jesus says, but okay.
There's also the idea that we would be resurrected in our 33-year-old bodies because Jesus was 33 when he died. So
far unimpressed with all of these early church theologians, but go ahead.
Origen thinks we'll be resurrected as orbs because orbs are like spherical and perfect. So our orb bodies.
Okay. While you're about, we're going to take a step away for a moment, and we're going to come back to her talking about this. To those of you who don't know, one of the early kind of theologians of the church is a guy named Origen, which is Origen, although they were probably not in our Roman characters, so I don't know how we decide that, but that's how we spell it, of Alexandria. And he was, and I use this term, like, he was like if David Lynch was a theologian. Like, he has no problem being totally crazy about like an idea and just going all for it and not, and like This is a man without any craps to give. He is just like, we're all orbs. And who's to say that God doesn't just start creation all over again someday and have all the same problems all over again? Like, he was way out there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fantastic. So Origin of Alexandria, anytime he's entered in it, he's like, when you think about, like, people are always like, who would you want to have at dinner? Like, 5 people you want to have at dinner. People always list like celebrities from America from the 20th and 21st century.
Yeah, like
and I'm like, right. And I'm like, you should consider Origin of Alexandria at your dinner party. Cause like things are going to get funky really quick.
Yeah.
Anyways, so go ahead. Back to resurrection bodies.
Right. So this question of like, what will our resurrected bodies look like? I see, I was just checking the comments briefly, and like Leslie talks about, if somebody is disabled in our lived experience here, does that mean they're going to have that same disability in their resurrected body? Or transgender people, like, what will their gender be, in their resurrected body? So there are a lot of like really interesting questions that I think are like fun to think through,
Right.
and kind of interesting. I mean, I think we do know sort of from scripture, my belief is that our resurrected body will be intelligible to the people around us. Like, somehow people will be able to recognize me as Kira.
Right.
And so then the question becomes, well, then, for a long time, it was like, well, what do you do with a body then when it dies, if it's going to need to be like ready for the resurrection?
Yeah.
So, people were buried with their feet facing east, so that when the Lord came, you'd be ready. You'd be ready to go.
You'd be raised up, ready to look in the right direction. The last thing you want on the resurrection day is to be raised up facing the wrong direction. Like, how embarrassing is that? A judgment day faux pas, if ever there was one.
The trumpets blow, Jesus descends,
and I'm like,
you're the loser looking the wrong way.
Right?
Right. So, there developed a lot of traditions around burial, and one of those was that the body needed to be somewhat intact, which, like, if you think about it, embalming was not a funeral practice until fairly recently in history.
Yeah.
So at some point you're talking, I'm sorry if I get a little graphic or this is sort of disturbing.
Can we get death graphic here? I'd love if we did.
But at some point you're dealing with the decomposition of a body.
Yeah.
The longer it's in the ground, of course. And so whether you're cremated or you're buried, what we would call a natural burial, which was how people were buried for most of human history, you're going to be thinking about, like, that's not a body as we kind of understand it.
That's right.
So, I mean, of course, the Roman Catholic tradition still holds that, they only recently kind of accepted cremation, and that was based on the issues that were brought up by like World War I, and like, what do you do with people who have either been essentially blown to smithereens in war, or their body has otherwise been mutilated or destroyed. Thinking right now about kind of like the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah.
And so, but the Catholic Church still holds that you can be cremated, but you have to, the cremains, as the funeral industry calls them, need to be interred in consecrated ground. Which is why if you look into like the Great Death, or what we call like the Black Death, the Black Plague, the Pope consecrated the Rhone River because so many people were dying and they needed to dispose of the bodies, and so they would just dump them into the Rhone River, and because it was consecrated, that sort of fulfilled that requirement.
Ooh. That's
I mean, ultimately my like answer kind of comes down to, if God can raise the dead, I'm not so worried about God kind of like piecing together,
reconstituting in some way.
Right.
Like half of my dad is scattered off the coast of Maine, which means theoretically he's all over the place in the ocean. and then the other half of him is in the ground in California. It's not like God's going to be like, oh man, that's just, I can't do it.
Yeah.
They're too far apart. Right.
Right.
So God's God. We don't have to worry about that.
Right.
And there's so many questions that are attached to this. I want to talk a little bit about what Jesus says.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to address Leslie's question over on the side, which is
Yeah.
a big part of what we're talking about, what you're talking about in terms of like how the church has identified this issue during times of great struggle and strife and war. But also Leslie points out just everyday life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what will my body be like? You know, what will it be like? And what are the things that are quote unquote wrong? What is having a whole body look like? I want to read Leslie's question, acknowledge its importance, and then I'd like to read what Jesus says in his confrontation with the Sadducees in the temple, if that would be okay.
Yeah.
Which has been helpful for me in more ways than one in terms of my getting my head around the resurrection. But here we go. I'm going to read through Leslie's questions over here on the side chat. Leslie says, people who have been paralyzed or amputated care about this conversation because they may or may not want to regain their mobility in their life ever after. Transgender people care because they already have dysphoria and they don't want to deal with living in the wrong body for all eternity. People who are born with disabilities care because if everyone goes into the same kind of body, does that mean God created them to be broken on earth? When people drew Stephen Hawking as standing at the gates of heaven, that really upset wheelchair users because it said God healed his disability. You might be healed too, but this is their life. Did God create them to be broken? Mm. So it calls into question right out of the gates from what I hear Leslie saying. Like they care, is my body like this because of a mistake? Did God make me like this on purpose? What of this lasts in the afterlife? How, and those are, to me, those questions are why I think we want to delve in to the resurrection on a realistic level and do the theology work that it takes to sort of, you know, like when we respond. Sorry, I'm trying to get closer to you and I'm not, physically can't get closer. There we go. But like, I think, you know, I like to start personally from the place of, we believe this is a reality, a bodily resurrection. Since we believe that to be true, then the kinds of questions Leslie is asking are, I think, the kinds of questions that we want to delve into. And I don't necessarily think they have answers, but at least not categorically. That's where I would differentiate myself from maybe perhaps other denominations, where each question must have an answer if you think through it hard enough. I don't know that it has an answer, but those are, I think, the right questions. How do we begin to understand the perfection of our body? What does that mean?
Yeah, and I think for, you know, what we might think of as like the perfection of our body, like, Bill, maybe you wish you had curly, that you know, your resurrected body, you want to have that curly full head of hair. And I
mean, I definitely would like to be taller and thinner.
Yeah, for those of us in sort of abled bodies, you know, we might wish certain other things. The best explanation I kind of heard about through the questions that Leslie is asking is that those identifying things, whether it's what we here on this side of the curtain would call a disability or a difference, or that kind of impedes what quote unquote normal functioning, trans people, other things that kind of deviate from what the world tells us is normal.
Right.
In our resurrected bodies, we will carry those markings, but they will not be fraught with the difficulty that they come with living in a culture that tells us there's only one right way, or there's only a few right ways to be a body, and it looks like, you know, Jennifer Lopez or whatever. And so that those are meaningful things to that person and makes that person kind of who they are, you know, whether it's like something that is a little less visible, say like, my friends that have like diabetes, you can't look at them and say that person has diabetes, or somebody that their struggle or their issue is like a little more visible to, just somebody walking down the street. But that those are part of like the Stephen Hawking example is great. Like, I don't think Stephen Hawking is standing at the gates of, first of all, not to say that non-Christians don't go to heaven, but he was pretty seriously a non-believer in that. So I don't want to like push him.
All the Christians who are like, he's standing before St. Peter right now is like, says who? Like, what gives you the right,
But that he would be, that the things that he struggled with on, this side of the curtain would not impede his functioning in the same way. They would still be a part of who he is and who he was, but they don't come with as much like baggage or oppression or whatever kind of term you want to use for that people so often struggle with.
Right. Okay. An anecdote about Stephen Hawking, then a quote from Jesus, and then a little description about Jesus' resurrection body. I saw Stephen Hawking speak when I was in college. He came to our college and I was able to get tickets, and I know nothing about science, but it's Stephen Hawking. You're going to go. And he's got this famous now voice, a computerized voice. That is, this was the choice there was very limited choices when he began getting a computerized voice. And someone asked him, like, it's got an American accent because it's like American robot, and he's British. And so someone asked him, this was back in 2000, I think 2001, technology's come a long way. You could have a voice that sounds like your voice did before all this happened. Or you could just have any voice you want, literally. Like, you're using this sort of digital sounding voice from the 80s, and it's 2000. And by the way, the person who asked the question, it was a very, like, they said it in a very kind way. Like, it wasn't a mean question, but it was sort of like, you're Stephen Hawking. Like, you could have any voice you want, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is my voice now. Like, this is how I hear myself. This is what it sounds like when I talk. And I wouldn't change it because then it wouldn't be my voice anymore. Man, I think about that
wow.
Yeah, like there's so much grace in that, in himself, like the graciousness that he carries towards his own life.
Yeah.
So I think about
that somebody would want to be more real.
More normal or real, this language that we use.
Right, like you were talking about your dad, like why would he be comfortable with being bald? Like, would he want to?
He could have hair.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, hair. All these people posting pictures about how they haven't gotten a haircut in a year, and I'm like, who's the sucker now? Right? Like, I'm living the dream over here, looking pretty much the same as I did when this whole thing started, except for a little bigger and a little grayer. But other than that, about the same. So that's the first part for us to ponder, Leslie. And is each person having an understanding of their own body and what makes it theirs is an ongoing process that each person experiences. So I think we want to be careful how we talk about the resurrection in that degree as the thing that fixes all your problems.
Yeah.
The thing that fixes all of your quote unquote brokenness. And so there's this story that about Jesus being confronted by some people who don't believe in a resurrection, a bodily resurrection. And I won't get into the whole story. It's a whole Bible study unto itself. But they sort of are basically, their premise is that resurrection doesn't make any sense. And they are using logic that would suggest that when you raised up, you basically are following the same rules of normal life as you did before your death. You're married to the same person, you have the same body, basically. So obviously resurrection in their minds is absurd. And Jesus' response is great. First of all, his first thing he says to them is not this the reason you are wrong? Oh man. Oh man. Be more civil, Jesus. Is not this the reason that you are wrong? That you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is God not of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong. It's like low-key one of my favorite readings now. Because Jesus, first of all, is just not to be messed with.
Yeah. He's not taking the whole premise of the question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, false premise. You know, people are like, there's no stupid questions. Wrong. This is a stupid question. But his idea is like, first of all, he insists on the resurrection powerfully and connects it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is amazing. When God looks at Moses and says, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he says, God is not the God of the dead, but the living, which means he's saying they are in resurrection with God now, which is awesome. Okay. Now, right. Oh, okay. But he also is saying, by saying they don't marry or are given into marriage, which is the premise that the Sadducees come to Jesus with. They have bodies, they are like the angels. There's a suggestion that whatever kind of bodily rules and societal strictures we've created here don't bind us in the same way post-resurrection. And then I would just go to the stories we have of Jesus in the resurrection, where in some ways he can eat fish, he can physically do things, you can touch him, you can see him, you can hear him and have interactions with him. And also he can pass through walls. And also when you first see him, you don't recognize him. Like there is this, you are you and you are also something else. So what I might want to suggest is, and so maybe the orbs is the best way to go.
Yeah.
So Leslie, we're all just orbs. I'm working my way towards orbism right now, but like, right. I've aspired to orbness, but like, so maybe there's a uniformity to it, you know, like in all really good utopian future movies, everyone's wearing the same thing. So maybe that's the case. But like this idea that you were talking about, Kira, that the things that hinder us from experiencing our belovedness here are no longer hindrances.
That's a much better way of putting what I was trying to say.
Oh no, well, you were speaking off the cuff and I've had time to digest it. But that is what you were saying.
Yes.
So the other thing I think about is our physical bodies matter.
Yes. Yes.
There's a physical reality even to God in Jesus. And our material, and the idea, by the way, so this is what I would say. There are versions of spirituality where your body is bad. And it's a hindrance to your experience. The resurrection of the body intimates or necessitates, whichever one, the redemption of your body. That your body, the thing which carries you throughout this life, is not a hindrance, and in fact has a redeemable and reconciliatory reality to it. That your body can both lead you into places that keep you away from God, but you don't need to get rid of your body to experience God fully. And so I think that's like actually also an important aspect of choosing to believe in the resurrection of the body. It can be, if we treat it right, in the parlance of our times, a body positive theology, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's my main takeaway from like the importance of the belief in the resurrection of the dead. One, I certainly hope that like one day I will, in those words of Job, like in my flesh, I will see God, and the power of that as well as like just the general importance of our bodies, because I do, and not just my body, but like the experience of every lived body, especially in this moment as we are trying, as we as white people are trying to listen more to those lived experiences of Black people, Indigenous people, other people of color,
Right.
and how those experiences differ from ours. The other thing that I want to briefly talk about is that I don't know if you saw, did you see the Pixar movie Soul?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So lovely movie, but like I was watching it partially in my like priest theologian mind, and I was like, I've got some big problems with this.
Interesting. Like pre-existence or
That very the separation of soul and body in a way that I think we have a tendency to do in our society,
yeah.
that is actually kind of quite opposed to Christian understanding. I mean, Soul is not a Christian movie. I'm not asking it to be.
Although the guy who co-directed it, Pete Docter, is a church-going Christian.
Oh.
And it matters a big deal to him. So he has said in interviews he doesn't plan on making Christian movies per se, but he is working within our framework. I mean, I think he's Presbyterian, but we'll allow it.
Yeah. Because I did find Soul to be a little Gnostic-y.
That's interesting. I want to think more about that. Because even as the souls are doing their thing, they are destined to be part of a body, and there's not completion until the body is, like, the body and the soul need to be together. And the creatures, the souls that spend too much time outside of their body end up like that ends up being a misery, a source of misery. So connection to the body is important in soul. There's more to talk about here. I like this. This is good. I like what Leslie says. I like to think that the life ever after will fit those of us with chronic illnesses and disabilities as we are, rather than us having to adapt to function in the rules of society. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's right. I think there are a group of us. And I'm still learning, and I'm not at all at the forefront of any kind of movement. Let's be honest. Whatever movements there are in the world, I'm somewhere square in the middle of any of them, and towards the back of most of them. But except that the movement to have Diet Coke fountains in heaven, I'm at the forefront. But I think there are those of us who are kind of coming around to this idea, Leslie, that trying to separate what we would consider disabilities now, and maybe they are. I mean, whatever. Like, call it a disability. To say that somehow you'll be freed of that and that's not who you are, has been liberating for some people, because you don't want to solely be defined by the ways you don't fit, or by the ways that you feel, or by an illness. You don't want that to be your sole definition, but you also don't want to pretend that it's not a part of who you are, and that the real you doesn't have that. Right? Those of us who have friends who have, and the most obvious example for me, but it's real, is friends who have Down syndrome. Is your hope for them that in heaven that they'll be a different person? Mine isn't.
Yeah.
And the people I know who are families or parents of people with Down syndrome, yes, there has been difficulty brought with that. Of course there have. And also, would they want their child, their family member, to be different personality-wise than they are? Absolutely not. Like, it's such a given. And that's a real window to, like, do we expect the resurrection to just make everyone look like, Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen, right? Like, is that the goal? I mean, and I think the reality is we belong to an American Christianity where actually that is kind of the version that we have.
Yeah.
And we've got to disabuse ourselves of that notion, right? We had another question that we're not going to get to, obviously. because we're us.
This is just so like rich and
Oh my gosh, a question about the resurrection. Good work, Becky, on asking. And yeah, there's so much here.
yeah. So I'm gonna draw Leslie's says, I don't want to be on meds in life ever after, but without bipolar, I wouldn't be who I am. It is fundamentally a part of who I am and how I function. And I think that's like, especially as we learn more about different kind of psychiatric conditions, even different, just sort of like what we might call neuroatypical. There was a great video that my husband showed me. It was a song about this guy who has ADHD and just like how much he drives his wife crazy, but he also has all these gifts too. And it was a little bit of my husband kind of saying like, look, just because I don't remember to pick up my socks, there are other gifts of living with me, which is true. And I love him for who he is. I wouldn't want him to be different, even though there are things that make me crazy.
Right.
And the one time I saw like a tweet that said like, if you wear some kind of corrective lenses, that's a disability. It's just been accommodated. So
Yeah.
I don't think I've worn corrective lenses since I was in first grade. I don't feel like it like is like a part of who I am. I would love in my resurrected body to have perfect vision. But that
Right.
idea of like, I don't look like somebody who is disabled, but really we're all just in a temporary state of ability. Like we're all, if we live long enough, we're going to injure ourselves, we're going to get older and lose certain kinds of functioning.
Right.
So any kind of abled status is always temporary. Like we
Right.
are in
Our
bodies that,
bodies are in flux. Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's true. No, you're right. I don't know if this is a long question or a short question. We could just do a quick answer of it.
Yeah.
My buddy JJ asked, what is your favorite quote unquote spiritual book outside of the Bible?
Mm.
And I have a few, but my two go-tos right now, and I'm embarrassed by one of them because it's so New England kid who went to prep schooly, but Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger is, and I read it recently again. I've read it probably 5 or 6 times. It's overly precious, but it's also the theology of it is like at the end, especially, it's like it hits me right. It hits me on so many levels that matter to me about what faithfulness looks like. And then The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Those are the two that I think are my favorite books right now that are spiritual, that aren't the Bible. Fire Next Time by James Baldwin and Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, so here's a confession. I don't like really read a lot of like
No.
spiritual books.
No. So you're not going to say The Shack? Okay, fine.
But I'll give you two that were very, very important to me in kind of developing my own spirituality and like my kind of adult spirituality, like one that was mine and not just like kind of passed down to me. And those are Kathleen Norris's Cloister Walk.
Okay.
That really kind of introduced me to like a monastic spirituality and what that might look like.
Right.
And then also, this is maybe a little bit, I don't know, played out or like boomery or whatever, but Anne Lamott's Traveling Mercies was like the first book I read that I was like, oh, this is somebody who is not sort of like holier than thou, not but like really grappling with like, if I say I believe these things, like what does that look like for me? Like what does that look like when I'm really, when I'm mad at George Bush, or like when I'm, like
one does when they wake up in the morning, they're just mad at George Bush and they need a book to read.
Those things that like kind of get our goats.
You and Laura both.
And in a way that felt very like earthy to me. And that made sense of some of the more of the like highfalutin concepts I'd kind of grown up with or heard talked about or whatever. So those are definitely there. I'm primarily, I'll confess, I am in my spare time, I am like a novel and memoir reader.
Nice.
Like
You should
I'm
confess that. That's okay.
I'm not reading like St. Augustine's
No,
City of God.
no.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I'm reading. You know what I'm reading right now?
What?
I'm reading a book about the making of the show Friends.
No, because you just finished watching a rewatch.
I watched the entire Krista and I. We watched the entire show for all 10 seasons in under a month. That was healthy. Anyways, I had only seen a few of them, and now I've seen them all. The name of the book about Friends is I think it's called "I'll Be There for You," and it's "I'll Be There for You," the one about Friends. That's what it's called. There's another one. There's two of them out there. There's one called Generation Friends that I'd like to read as well because I'm getting obsessed. I'm interested in like I can't just enjoy things.
Right.
I have to like figure things out about it. Okay, so your books are Traveling Mercies by Anne Lamott and Walking the Cloister. Is that right?
Cloister Walk.
Cloister Walk by Kathleen Norris.
Mm-hmm.
Mine are Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger and The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And before we wrap up, and though we are now late, what have you been listening to?
I have been listening to Sturgill Simpson, re-recorded his catalog.
Yes, he did. Yes. Tell them. Tell them. This is yes.
Did bluegrass recordings of his catalog, and they're great.
It's delightful. Great. It's both volumes so far are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
His album Sailor's Guide to Earth, I think it's called,
mm-hmm.
is I think a classic. Like I think it's like a top 10 of the last decade type of album. But all the bluegrass versions of those songs are just as good.
Right. Like even listening to the bluegrass versions, I was like, I feel like I don't know this song. And then it would get to the chorus and I'd be like, oh, I do know this song.
Yeah. I have a friend who never couldn't stand Sturgill Simpson. And then he heard these and he's like, okay, I could get into him. Like he likes the bluegrass versions better than the
Was it too like kind of electronic? Or?
It was like just too like, what's he getting at here?
One of my favorite Sturgill Simpson stories is because I live in Nashville.
Yeah.
That one of the years that one of the big country music award shows was downtown at our big arena, and Sturgill Simpson was not nominated for anything
or invited to it.
And he stood outside and busked with his guitar.
I love that. I've heard that too. I love that story. That's the right way to live. Yeah. That's good living right there. Yeah, man, that's really cool. I've been listening to, since last week. So I think you know that I'm a big fan of Puddles the Clown.
Yeah, I've noticed you posted something on Instagram.
I love him. I've seen him 4 or 5 times live, and actually corresponded very, very briefly with him once. And my children all know who he is. And I just go into spaces where I need to hear his voice. He's got a beautiful voice. If you weren't paying attention to the videos and just listening, he just sings these wonderful, glorious songs and in his own way and with this beautiful voice, and they make me very happy. But I watched him all day yesterday while making bread and well, not the whole day, but the period of time where I was making bread and while I was working on dinner, and cleaning and all that. Yeah. I've been listening to him. So Puddles, he's my guy. Yeah. And other than that, I continue to go down this just nonstop Ella Fitzgerald. Like she's just hanging out with me all the time.
I mean, could be worse.
There are worse people to hang. Oh, and I'm an ongoing like Dylan all the time guy. So it's not like if I'm listening to Dylan, it's which Dylan albums am I listening to? Right, so this week it was Times They Are A-Changin' and Blonde on Blonde.
Yeah.
I listened to Blonde on Blonde, I think 3 times in a row this week, just because I couldn't get it out of my head. So good. So good. So good. And I listened to a Nina Simone album. What's that?
There's a new new Weezer album.
Oh, how is it?
It's like a very like dad rock album.
Ah,
I say that lovingly as someone
yeah.
who, like, I remember seeing Weezer at some festival in Dallas when I was in high school, and now like now they're making music for, you know, people in their mid 30s and
Yeah.
40s.
Yeah. My brother used to like be in the same circles as Rivers Cuomo because they sent their kid to the same preschool.
Mm.
So they'd end up at the same like parties, but not the cool parties, like the
But like
preschool parties.
the parent parties.
And my brother's joke was that like Rivers actually liked my brother because my brother didn't give a crap about his music, and like he
Yeah.
just cared that he was this little kid's dad and that they had that in common. And he was like, he'd like say something about his music. My brother was like, look, my little brother knows your music. I don't know your music. And Rivers was like, oh, cool. Like it made it easier. Like,
Yeah,
I'm not a fan. We can have a normal conversation. Instead of, I wish you liked my music. It was like, okay, good. You're not my audience. We can hang out.
yeah.
You know? It's sort of like when you're hanging out with a Jewish person, you're like, I'll never convert you and you'll never come to my church. Let's have a normal conversation. Oh, I can be normal with you. This is great. This is fantastic. All right, friend. This is a joy. It's always a joy.
Yes.
Lisa, Leslie, Mary, Betsy, Kathy, anyone else who's been with us. Albert, we didn't get to your question about The Expanse. We'll get to it next week. Don't worry, Albert. We got your back. I don't know why no one told you about it, but we're going to work on that next week.
We're going to tell you about some other things.
Yes, we will. And what is Albert missing this week? And what next week we'll officially, we're going to have the new rollout of all the new stuff. And Kira, it's you and me. We're in this together, friend.
Yeah.
High five.
We're getting a little bit more official.
I think we did it right.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.